number 5.
This story is a hard one for me to tell, since I have never told or talked about it to anyone beside to the people that were involved. This didn't happen to me, but it did happen to my mother, which still haunts me to this day. Here's a little backstory of my mother. It'll make sense why I'm telling you this later. Before she met my father, my mum was in the process of becoming a police officer. She wasn't in the academy, but she was learning everything she could at her university and through the classes provided by a local police station. My mum did not end up becoming a cop because my dad was already one, and she didn't want both of them being cops due to the fact that they would never see each other or be able to spend time to take care of their future kids, aka me and my 2 older brothers, Rob and Lance. So here's what happened. When I was a sophomore in high school, my mum went out for a weekend with my aunt and uncle. It was a small little getaway to a beach city, and it was very much deserved by my mother, who was always a hard-working person. On the last night of this little vacation, the 3 of them went to a restaurant for dinner and drinks. This place had a bar, and whenever a customer would order a drink from their table, the server would tell the bartender and would make it for them, and put the drink at the end of the bar for the server to pick up and give to the customer. Well, my mum told the server what beverage she would like, and the server told the bartender. Once the bartender finished making her cocktail, he, like he always did, put the drink at the end of the bar for the server to pick it up. This is where I have a hard time not crying. Some guy apparently had been watching my mum throughout the course of her visit and was listening in on what she ordered to drink. Neither my mum, aunt or uncle had noticed a guy staring or eavesdropping on them. But this fucking asshole decided to get my mum's drink at the end of the bar awaiting for pickup and put the date rape drug in it. No one noticed him do it, and after he had done this, the server picked up my mum's drink and promptly gave it to her. Mum, of course, sips on it during the meal, and as some time goes by and she starts to feel dizzy and nauseous, she immediately knew something was wrong because she wasn't even close to being drunk. She then decides to excuse herself from the table and go to the restroom. The restrooms are in the back of the restaurant and are next to the back door, which leads to an alleyway where there's trash bins, employee parking and cameras. The man follows my mother to the bathroom and, before she enters the ladies' room, pushes her through the back door into the poorly lit alley. After he shoved her through the door, she stumbles onto the concrete. Then he pounced on her, like a dog. Mum was trying to make out any facial features, but couldn't because of the drugs and how dark it was. The only characteristic she remembered was how big he was. The big man at this point is trying to rape my mother, trying to take off her pants, shirt and undergarments. While she was trying to resist, he was hitting and cutting her with some type of blade he had. During this, he would whisper in her ear about how beautiful she was and how he couldn't just let her go without getting a little taste. Such a sick fuck. Luckily, she remembered her police training she completed years ago and somehow managed to get away from him. She went to the trash bins and started making as much noise as possible to get someone's attention. She wasn't able to scream or try to get back into the restaurant due to the drug symptoms. One of the employees, thank God, heard my mother and jumped on the guy. After that, my mum doesn't remember because she instantly collapsed as soon as the employee came to her rescue. The next thing she remembers is being in a hospital room and cops at her bedside. She then was asked what she remembered. She told the police, and after she told everything she could and asks, "What happened after that kid came to help me?" The police then let her know that the employee jumped on her attacker, pinned him down, and had other employees call 911. The kid stayed on top of this guy until the police showed up and handcuffed him. To the kid that saved my mum's life, thank you so much. We are forever in your debt and will forever be grateful for you. The paramedics rushed my mum to the hospital. She had suffered a broken eye socket, nose, and 3 cuts to the chin, scalp, and stomach, all needing multiple stitches and staples. While Mum was in the hospital, and after the police questioned her, my aunt called us and told us what had happened, and without hesitation, we rushed to the hospital to see her. It was a sight I will never be able to forget. The bastard that did this did not know what he was getting himself into. In questioning, the police had informed the culprit that my mum is not someone to fuck with. My mother is the daughter to a high-ranking police officer, the niece of a US federal marshal, wife to a lieutenant, and cousins to 3 lawyers. He pled guilty on all 3 counts he had before him and was sentenced to 25 years to life.
Number 4.
My story comes from when I was an undergraduate at the University of Hawaii. I was a freshman back then and was trying very hard to get out of my shell and become my own person. I grew up with a very controlling mother who would blame everyone else for things that went wrong and was naturally very reserved. I've had creeps hit on me since I was 12, as I was tall for my age and developed quite early. I learned to be smart about not leaving myself in compromising circumstances, but at the same time was unwise because I was reluctant to tell people about what had happened because I felt I would be inconveniencing them, and I was taught not to call the police unless it was truly a desperate emergency. Unfortunately, I did not grow out of this mindset going into undergrad, which I regret on a few occasions, this being one of them. One day, while on the bus leaving school, I saw an older white man, maybe in his mid-40s to early 50s, who was of athletic build and about 6 foot, staring at me on the bus. He wore a baseball cap and sunglasses with khaki shorts and a polo shirt. While I was slightly weirded out, this was nothing out of the ordinary. He looked like a typical old tourist, and it wasn't unusual for older men to look at me because they found my mixed ethnicity, I'm Japanese and white, exotic, or were staring at my figure. I dressed in t-shirts and jeans a lot back then, so it's not like I was flaunting my figure, but again, I would still get stares. He got off the bus long before me, so I thought that was the end of it and thought nothing more of it. That is, until about 2 weeks later. About 2 weeks later, I was on my way home again and the same man got on the bus from the mall nearby. This day was kind of cloudy, but there he was again, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses. That's odd, I thought. What is he trying to hide? This time around, he wouldn't stop staring at me. From my experiences, I've learned that most people are oblivious and won't try to help you unless the guy is literally accosting you physically or very loudly harassing you verbally. So people continued to ignore this guy watching me for about 20 minutes non-stop, leaning towards me in his seat. I went to the front of the bus when I got to my stop to try and go by the bus driver to feel a little safer. Bad idea. The man snuck off the bus at the back door, which I only noticed after walking quickly for a few yards. He had this wide, creepy grin, and he followed my movements to a T. If I took 2 steps right, he would do the same. I knew this man wasn't my neighbour, and that he was up to no good. As I started walking faster, almost at a run, he started to close the distance between us very quickly with his long strides. I started to panic, because I knew for certain that no one was at home at that time, neither my mum or my grandparents, because they were out doing something and had told me that they'd be home in about 3 hours after I had come home from class. I pulled out my phone and typed in 911, ready to call if he tried something. I saw that one of my neighbours, who has a large family, was home and had relatives over, judging by the cars. As I moved into their driveway, a block from my house, the creep moved horizontally to the left, matching my movements again, with a fixed smile as he slowly passed behind another neighbour's hedges. I was terrified and paralysed with fear. I stood among my neighbours and their relatives' cars, clutching my phone, ready to dial. Sadly, I never did call the police, and I never told my family about it, which I regret. After 15 minutes with the sun starting to lower in the sky, I walked to the edge of my neighbour's driveway and saw the man, a block away in the opposite direction, standing with his back faced towards me and with his hands on his hips, just staring into the distance. When he remained this way for 5 to 10 minutes, I decided to run for my house as I didn't want to risk getting attacked by him and people assuming I was just some stupid kid crying wolf. I looked a few times, and even as I got into my driveway, he was still in the same position I saw him last, just staring at nothing. I never saw him again after that. However, a week later, my university sent out a security text which sent chills all over my body as I read it. It was about an older white man who had stalked 2 foreign freshman female students to their shared apartment days before I had been followed. He just stood there next to them even though they yelled at him to go away. He wanted them to open their door, but instead they called the police and he ran. For a few weeks the police were searching the island for him until they caught him. It turns out he had a history of stalking women and had been recorded for raping one. From then on, I learned not to fear calling someone or even call the police and go out with your gut feeling. It's not an inconvenience. Only recently, over 6 years later, did I discover that my ethnicity probably was why he targeted me. I was his type of prey. It still freaks me out when I think about it.
Number 3.
I was out riding my bike around my neighbourhood. We live in a pretty safe suburban neighbourhood and nothing bad or weird ever happens here. I was riding at about 5:30 PM and got to the other neighbourhood right next to mine. I'm riding and I come across this little small thin puppy. Imagine the kind of puppy Boo the dog is, since I'm not really familiarised with dog breeds. So I stopped and looked at it. I could see it was wearing a pink collar and didn't seem lost. So I continued my ride. I came back about 9 minutes later and he was still there. I guess it must have been its house. Not even 2 seconds later, a Ford Free Ride comes around the corner and stops in front of me. A man walked out. At this point, all flags went off. The man had to be at least in his mid or late 50s and looked like the offspring of a meth head and a pedophile.
"Is this your house?"
he asks in a low monotone voice. No sir, it's not," I reply.
"Are the owners home now?"
he asks. I could smell cigarette in his breath. I noticed that there were no cars in the driveway, so I said, I don't think so."
"Oh, okay. Is this your dog?"
No."
"Oh."
He said it in an excited and sick way that made me nervous, so I said, "Okay, well, bye," and started rolling off.
"Goodbye."
I turned around and saw the puppy looking at me nervously. I decided maybe this guy was just an air conditioner guy. I know it's a weird conclusion, but I was scared. About 10 minutes later, I rode back to where the dog was, and to my surprise, the owners were home. I felt a sigh of relief for a second, until I got closer. I noticed that the front windows were smashed, and the owner's car was beat up pretty fucking bad. I reached into my pocket to call the police, but just as I did, I noticed something. It was circular and pink. My heart sank when I saw it was the puppy's collar. I quickly called the cops, who got there amazingly quick. I guess the Oro Valley sheriffs don't mess around. Once they got there, a full-on SWAT team shows up as well. They kicked open the already busted door and were greeted by a severed arm and leg. To sum up the story, the man killed them and the puppy. They found its severed head in the toilet. I rode home and tried to calm the fuck down. I hated myself for not stopping the suspicious man from hurting that poor family and dog. As far as I know, the man was never fucking caught either. The thing that kills me to this day is remembering turning back to check on the dog and seeing his skinny, innocent face looking straight back at me.
Number 2.
This happened to me about a month and a half ago. A little backstory. I'm 24 and I live in Albuquerque. If you're not familiar, we have a large mountain called the Sandias, which is part of the Rockies that sits touching the east side of the city. I'm an avid rock climber and go on hikes often. Now, I'm a person who is not usually scared or afraid of the dark, so this summer I had started night hikes due to the warmth at night, and the clear skies normally mean it's beautiful and surreal. This one night, I had decided to drive around to the back of the mountain and try to find this spot a friend was talking about because the backside is easier to get to the top. I parked in a dirt parking lot off the dirt road. I had hopes that this was the spot I was looking for, but it wasn't. I decided to stay because there weren't any cars other than mine, and it was a trail that went to the top, so I started hiking to the top. It was about 3.5 miles from where I parked, and it was about 11 when I got to the top and lost all cell service. Everything was off. Everything was going fine, and it was a nice night, and I could see the city and the stars. I found a fire pit left by some campers, or someone. I didn't start a fire because it was around 90 degrees, so I sat at one of the logs near to it and was drinking water and relaxing. It was about an hour later that, while looking at the stars, I heard some voices and a light coming from the distance. At first, I thought that they were just campers heading to use the fire pit I was at because it was the only one I had seen for miles that was close to the top. So I packed up my stuff and was prepared to keep moving on the trail, but as the group of people got closer, I noticed that only a couple had flashlights and the rest looked like torches, like something you would see in Indiana Jones or something. I found this odd, so I decided to walk about 30 feet away from where I was to this rock formation that was out of sight, so I could get a better look as they got closer. As they got to where I was earlier, I could only make out shadows, which I thought was odd, but attributed it to the fact that they had light and my eyes had already adjusted to the night. They took a minute to get a fire going, but it wasn't hard for them because they brought wood and started it with the torches they brought. By this time, I could see that the reason I couldn't see them before was because they were dressed head to toe in black robes. The robes had a symbol I couldn't quite make out on the chest, and they were hooded and covered their faces, and only eye holes were semi-visible, except for one girl being held by two of them with a black sack over her head. They then proceeded to tie her to the tree closest to the fire. By this time, I noticed there were about 12 to 15 hooded figures gathered around the fire. They then took the bag off of her head, and you could see she was gagged. They also undid the gag, and then she started pleading for her life. By this point, I had gotten closer and was just out of sight of the light of the fire because I was considering trying to take all these guys on to save her, when I noticed that two of the hooded figures had guns. I don't know what kind, it was hard to tell because they were black against the black of the robes. As I stood there in the dead silence, listening and trying to figure out if I could do anything, one of the hooded figures pulled a knife as the others finished setting up for whatever kind of ritual they were doing. The hooded figure then goes up to this girl and starts cutting her and putting her blood in some kind of cup or something. And I will never forget the bone-curdling scream she let out as they started to cut her. It will haunt me for the rest of my life. So I stepped back to retreat when I stepped on a stick and made enough noise that someone flashed a flashlight in my direction. I quietly crept further and further back as one of the members came to investigate, but by the time that they were there, I was about another 20 feet away behind a rock where I waited until he headed back to the group. Then I began to circle around to the other trail, being careful to be quiet and carefully, but going as fast as I could, getting the heck away. I turned to look at them for the last time before I couldn't make anything out. It looked like they were cutting off her skin and putting it on the fire, but I kept moving till I got to the other trail. Unfortunately, I didn't know how to get back to my car from that trail, only the one that I came up on, but it meant having to go close to them again, and I didn't want to risk it. So I ended up walking half a mile away and climbing a tree so I could see the fire in the distance. I waited there till morning and I was sure that they were gone before heading back to my car and going home. As I walked by the fire pit, you would never have guessed that the bloodstains on the tree were actually blood. They almost looked natural. Not saving that girl will haunt me for the rest of my life.
Number 1.
This happened when I was about 16 years old. My girlfriend and I at the time, and her friend Kelly, and my best friend Chris, were hanging out at the school in my hometown. I come from a small town, so there isn't much to do. It starts to get pretty dark. A beat-up green SUV pulls up, and this girl gets out and walks across the street to a pretty well-known drug house, leaving what I assume is her boyfriend in the car. The dude keeps staring at us, and I assume he was checking out my girlfriend. No big deal, as long as he stays away from us. A few minutes later, my uncle rides by on his bicycle. My uncle is 40 years old and doesn't drive and lives with his mum, and sometimes I mess with him a little bit. As he rides by in a weird voice, I say,
"Slow down, Speed Racer. We're all going to get to the same place at the same time."
My uncle ignores me and just keeps riding by. At that moment, the dude from the SUV gets out of the car, comes over and says,
Hey, you punk. You shouldn't fuck with people you don't know.
Understanding that he was trying to show off for the girls, which is kind of weird because we were 16 and he was at least 20, I say,
"Relax, dude. He's my uncle. I was just teasing him."
The guy responds,
I don't give a fuck. Do you know who I fucking am?
At this point, my girlfriend starts to get scared and moves closer to me. The guy continues,
I know you. You're Eric's little brother, aren't you?
As soon as he mentioned my brother, I knew things were going to get serious. My brother was notoriously involved with gangs and selling drugs. Stuff I tried not to get involved with, and any time I ran into someone who knew him, it almost always turned out bad. But I wasn't a punk either. At 16, I was 6'1" and 185 pounds, wrestled varsity for a 6-time state championship team. I was also a notorious fighter, and people usually tried to avoid getting in physical confrontations with me. Plus, I was in full defense mode with my girlfriend and my friends around. The guy wasn't all that big either.
"Why don't you go back to your car and mind your business, Mighty Mouse?"
I said. The guy moved a little closer to us.
You're a little bitch, just like your brother.
This made me up from leaning on Chris's car. I started walking towards him as my girlfriend tried to pull me back. I don't think the guy realized how big I actually was because he stepped back as I approached him and pulled out a switchblade. That was the second time that week I had a knife pulled on me, so I wasn't about to take the high road like I normally would.
"Chris, pop the trunk,"
I said. Chris knew exactly what to do and popped the trunk and threw me a golf club. I struck the pavement and yelled,
"Come on!"
like a bloodthirsty animal. I can usually maintain my composure, but no one threatens my friends or disrespects my family. The guy turns around and runs to the SUV as his girlfriend comes out running. They get in the car and they sped away. As they sped past us, the guy made a gun gesture with his hands and pointed it at me. Adrenaline was coursing through my veins and my girlfriend was scared. She said she didn't even recognize me. I think she never really got over it, and we broke up a few days later. She just didn't see me as the same person after seeing me like that. Fast forward 6 months. Me and some friends walked about a mile from my house to the gas station. We'd been up playing Call of Duty all night, and the store closest to my house was closed, so we went to the gas station for soda and snacks. On the way back, we were carrying our snacks as we walked by the junkyard. A big Roddy comes running out and barking at us. I flip it a piece of jerky and it stops barking. After we were about 100 feet away, it started barking again. I looked back and saw a man with a hoodie pulled over his head, walking behind us. He's gaining on us, fast. Something in my head started screaming that we were in danger.
"James,"
I said as I handed him the bags I was carrying. We kept walking forward normally, as if we didn't notice.
"This dude is up to no good. If he tries something, I want you to run and call the cops and get my dad, no matter what happens to me."
James is one of my best friends, but he is by no means a fighter. The guy was maybe 25 feet behind us now. 20. 10. 5 feet away. As soon as I sensed he was within striking distance, I turned and threw a hook, using the momentum of my turn for power and landing it right on his jaw. As he stumbled back, I grabbed his arm and placed the back of my shoulder, pulling down on his arm and throwing him over my body, dislocating his shoulder and dropping him on his head. While he rolled on the ground, I saw he had a gun tucked in his belt. I grabbed it before he could, and I checked the magazine. It was loaded. I kept the man at gunpoint while James ran to my house and called the cops. They showed up and handcuffed him. They pulled his hood down, and it was the same guy from the night at the school. He looked me dead in the eyes and said,
I'm gonna kill you, you punk.
He went to prison for a while, and since then I've joined the Marines. But before I left and after he got out, I ran into him a couple of times around town. He either doesn't remember me or doesn't want to test me again. Either way, I never took my eyes off of him whenever I saw him. G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video guys. A big shout out goes to the Hive members that shared their stories on this one. And for the opportunity to have your story feature in a video, you can send me your stories to my email, which is in the description below. And make sure to keep them coming guys, as this channel relies upon your stories to continue now. Even if you're not quite confident about your story or your writing skills, email me anyway and we can try and work together to ensure it's delivered to the Hive well. So a few of you guys have also messaged me again in relation to Mimic channels that have popped up. Thank you all so much for doing this guys. It's great to know what's happening out there in the wider community of YouTube, so thank you so much for notifying me. And I have tried to place a notification to YouTube about what's going on, but unfortunately nothing seems to be happening at this stage. So I guess the best way to help me is if you would like to send an email to YouTube notifying them of that Mimic channel and kindly asking them to take the channel down. I guess that's probably the best way to proceed at this stage. I also wanted to say thank you to everyone for your support over the past couple of days. You guys have honestly just been so unreal. The amount of support I have received and the encouragement to continue with the channel, even though the horror community has to make some changes and I personally have to make some changes to the channel, is really amazing. You guys have really helped me to stay positive and, really encouraged me to just press on and to make this happen. So thank you so much for your support guys. I'm really excited about where the channel's going now. I'm really excited about having your stories feature on the channel much more and giving you guys the limelight. So thank you guys so much for that. And on that note, it would be great if you could like, share, comment and subscribe to the channel if you're new. Thanks again for watching guys, and as always, I'll see you mates in the next one.